Good morning, Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 Good Minutes with the Word. We're continuing our study of the Gospel of Mark, and we're beginning in chapter 3, verse 1, and we're going to read through verse 6. This is the fifth and final of the 5 vignettes, the 5 episodes that illustrate the demise of Jesus' relationship with the Pharisees. And so they have gone from thinking to asking the disciples, to asking Jesus respectfully, to confronting Jesus angrily, and today they're baiting Jesus, trying to find a reason to accuse him, and then they start to plot his death. And so we're going to read this. Again, it's about Sabbath keeping. It's about Sabbath keeping. It's not about when he called himself God. They've let that go. It's about Sabbath keeping, which tells you something about their attitude towards Scripture and towards truth, doesn't it? Their traditions are more important to them than their theology. Okay, let's read verses 1 through 6 of chapter 3. He entered again into the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they were watching him to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath, in order that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, "Rise and come forward." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill?" But they kept silent. And after looking around at them with anger, grieved at the hardness of heart, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. And the Pharisees went out and immediately began taking counsel with the Herodians against him, as to how they might destroy him. Okay. Wow. It seems to have happened so fast, so quickly. And of course, everything in the Gospel of Mark happens quickly. And it probably did happen just this quickly. I'm sure it seemed that way at the time, that it didn't take very long at all for the Pharisees to go from being curious and interested to being open enemies of Jesus. And all the while, they cannot deny that he can heal. And they cannot deny his power to heal, although in the next chapter, they're going to try to denigrate that power to heal. And we'll see Jesus' stern warning about that. Jesus enters into a synagogue. Whether this is the chief synagogue of Capernaum, we're not sure. It says a synagogue. There was a man there with a withered hand, and I believe it's Matthew's gospel that lets us know that the man was brought there. This account is also in Luke's gospel. But anyway, they've baited Jesus with this man, and they're waiting, and they're silent. They're not. They're holding their cards here. And they're expecting Jesus to play all of his, which he's not afraid to do. Jesus has waited till after the event and their question to give his answer. But today there's not going to be a question. So he gives his answer at the beginning. And he says, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill?" Now, that's really in two parts. Those aren't exactly the same thing. To do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill. Because the Mishnah itself allows someone to save a life on the Sabbath and to take any step necessary to save a life on the Sabbath. It's interesting that they came up with that. God didn't come up with that. They made the exception because of the principle that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. They're not even believing their own principles that guide their decisions. That's why Jesus connects the two. Because if the Sabbath is made for man and not man for the Sabbath, then doing good, like restoring this man's hand, in no way violates the Sabbath. That's why it's important for Jesus to say it exactly the way he did, because he doesn't only call attention to the principle he's already mentioned, but to the way they have already understood and applied that principle. And they don't say a word. And it makes Jesus angry. This is the one event in the Gospels in which Jesus is said to be angry. And that's important. I'm not saying it's the only time Jesus is angry or was ever angry. I don't believe that at all. I'm saying this is the one time that we're given that word as a motivating factor for Jesus' actions. And so we should pay attention to this. Why is Jesus angry? Because he himself has been disrespected or hurt, or because someone else was being treated callously? It's because someone else had been treated callously. And how did it express itself? In vitriol and hatred and bloodshed and violence, or name calling, or verbal violence, the kind of thing that he prohibits in the Sermon on the Mount? No. It produces in his heart grief, not vitriol. And it produces in his deeds the healing of the man who is in distress and pain. And that's a lesson for us all as well. Well, the result is that this is it. This is it. That they're not going to talk to Jesus anymore. When they ask him questions, it's only to bait him. To not just to debate him, but to bait, B-A-I-T, him, into doing something they can accuse him of because they're wanting to kill him. And it says they take counsel with the Herodians. Now the Pharisees, talking to the Pharisees and the Herodians, seeing them together with their heads together, making plans together, is like seeing, Antifa and the neo-Nazis getting together to plot a joint action, because they are at the absolute opposites of the spectrum. They despised each other on all points except this: Jesus has got to go. And so this really is a foreshadowing of what's about to come. And it says a lot about how we allow Satan to control our lives when we nitpick and are narrow in our application of Scripture instead of broad in extrapolating out from the principles that God has given to us. The principles will make broader claims than our nitpicking will. And the principles, if we apply them and live them, will change us. And the nitpicking only makes us rule keepers. And nobody can live and bear up under that, as the New Testament will point out many, many times. Okay. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll continue on in chapter 3 next time.